What happens if you cross Rocky Horror, Moulin Rouge and The Great Gatsby with opera? Modern day lust with classical yearning. Today we are deep diving into the sexier side of Mozart. And yes, I did just call Mozart sexy. See, Mozart didn't just compose music to make babies smarter, he also composed one of the most salacious and scandalous operas in history. Welcome to Victorian Opera's newest show, Abduction. Constantine Costi, you are putting on this really bold, reimagined production of Mozart. I would really love to know, what was the spark for this reimagining?
Where do you begin? I mean, it's sort of, you know, you're tasked with bringing something which has some of the most miraculous, glorious, moving, witty music I think ever written to 2025. Yes. And we're talking about something that was written in the 1700s, right? So the core of it, the characters and music are phenomenal. But the big question hanging over this work is, what do you do with a kind of outdated setting, right? Yes. So the original is set in this Turkish harem, and these women are kind of abducted and they're swept up in this sort of like exoticized Ottoman world. And there's like a lot of, and Vienna at the time was under like this Ottoman obsession where they were into like the fashion of it and the music and blah, blah, blah. But of course, lots of stereotypes and stuff that, just hasn't fared well over time. And so this is the big question for a modern director, being like, okay, well, how do we take the best parts of this and leave some of the parts that's more outdated? And for me, it's about going to kind of the essential DNA of the piece, which is about these two women discovering themselves and working out how best they want to live. So it's a very simple human question at the heart of it. And so so updating it to a modern setting and shedding the stuff that, you know, can be shed.
And these are such relevant modern yearnings as well, and particularly I think for this production, what feels already so contemporary is the characterization of the two heroines, who are these incredibly complex women, even for the time in which it was written, but especially for your adaptation. I would love to hear more about how that play of gender and identity works. Yeah,
great question. So I think the whole conceit is that, so the way they were originally it's set in the harem of this guy called the Pasha Zelim, right? So we were like, okay, let's imagine that context as like, there's maybe a strange kind of mansion on the edge of town where like kind of delicious, slightly out of bounds parties happen.
It sounds like Rocky Horror.
Yeah, it's got Rocky Horror elements to it. So it's like, and this is question of like, is it a club? Is it a cult? It depends on your perspective. And so we've decided these two women, Constanza and Blonda, are about to get engaged. And they're like, okay, well, look, we've got this window before we get married. Let's go and see what happens inside.
And very relatable.
Very relatable, exactly. One last chance. And of course, they're followed by their kind of like, I would say, jealous fiancés, right? Who are charming and witty and hilarious, but ultimately quite fearful of their partners. You know,
what they're going to find in the house of Pasha.
Yes, and how will they come out on the other side is really interesting. And then so we're really fascinated by these two women who go into this space not only to physically transform, but to discover something in themselves. And I'm very interested in the fact that, you know, we live in a very in an age of intense etiquette and right and wrong and Instagram tiles telling you how you should and shouldn't be, and the top 10 ways to be a modern man in today's century, or how to be this kind of woman. And I'm interested in spaces that are potentially dangerous and wild and challenging, and that's how you grow. When you go into something that's darker and more confronting, you come out the other way knowing a bit more about yourself. And this is the journey that these two women go on.
Fascinating. So it sounds like one of the core parts of this reimagining is taking the source material and bringing it to the space of this almost zone of ambiguity, and that's the space where that change does happen within yourself, in this kind of unknown, indefinable place of being. How fascinating. How do you bring that to the stage in a physical sense?
Yeah, good question. So basically the way that I like to work is very physical anyway. Like I feel like, you know, they call it like the park and bark, right? Which is when opera singers kind of stand there and declare their lines with kind of dead eyes. Whereas I view opera as a very physical medium. You know, it comes from the body first of all, and singing is kind of almost like an intense animal thing to be doing. You know what I mean? You like to think that maybe before human beings were talking, they were singing or, you know, kind of like moving rhythmically or something. So that's the kind of core that I like to work with. And so there's a few ways that we're doing that. Firstly, it's the physical transformation of the women. They go through these costume changes, the way they hold their body kind of completely transforms throughout the whole thing.
Right.
And then looking at key moments where they're also physically challenged, because I'm interested in if it's this sort of like ambiguous, is it a cult, is it a dangerous place, looking at moments within so there's a famous aria in the piece called Marta alla Arten, and I won't give up too much, but it means tortures of every kind.
Wow.
And it's Constance at the end of her tether saying, I'm ready to be tortured, I'm ready to die. And we're sort of exploring the idea of power and submission. And is there something about you take the reins by actually giving in to something, and that being an active choice.
Fascinating, and especially to kind of explore such emotional depth within that moment of song. And from what I understand, that is an incredibly hard sing. It's one of the most incredible numbers. In terms of how you go about staging this then, or even performing a number where you are playing with these very philosophical ideas of power, dominance, submission. I love this idea that you've said that in giving up power, you become empowered. While singing one of the most incredible numbers. How does this look? How does that feel for the audience? I guess when you're, what do you want them to take away from that moment? Well,
I think that's right. So I think on the surface level, it's just the most incredible vocal performance you've ever heard. It's 9 minutes of just the most outrageous roller coaster of vocal melodic singing.
9 minutes?
Yeah, I don't know how they do it without collapsing into a heap on the floor at the end. And so I think the whole idea is, though, for me, if an audience want to kind of listen to something that has no gradient to it, there's always the recordings. I think there's something about the excitement of seeing live singing, which can have sort of an angularity to it that you don't necessarily get into a recording. And also thinking about the narrative across a piece as well. It's not just there to be enjoyed just as vocally impressive, but also I'm always concerned with what is the story of this. So even when singers go on, you know, what's called coloratura, like aha, like these runs, it's saying what is the journey there, what is the subtext? And that's what makes the opera so special, that it's storytelling through singing.
That's also something that feels so special to be able to connect with the time in which Mozart was writing these pieces. And it is all about this shared experience of these hundreds, thousands of people in this case, being able to share a live moment of theatre where not only are you going to see one of the most incredible performers probably in Australia on stage at this time, but also to be able to go on this emotional journey, not only with the performer, but with all of those people. That is something that connects us to back in the 1700s when Mozart was writing the piece.
Absolutely. It could never exist in a vacuum. You know what I mean? These things were written to be experienced as a group and to have a shared experience. And that's something so special and something I think only the opera can do in terms of a multi-sensory experience. Like, it's amazing sets, amazing costumes, like some of the best designers in Melbourne at the moment. And also just to be kind of grabbed by the lapels by this music. And I wouldn't want to sit in a hall like this on my own. Like, you know, I want to be around hundreds of people as well, going on the same journey. So there is something, I would say, communally celebratory about a night at the opera like this.
Absolutely, and especially for new and young opera goers.
Yes.
I would love to hear about what they're going to be most surprised about coming into this production, especially if this is your first experience of opera. What kind of breaks away from traditional expectations or stereotypes? Like, please, I'd love to know.
This is my life's mission, really, to kind of to bring the opera to non-opera audiences. And I didn't come from an opera family, you know. I come from a very supportive family, but I wasn't raised by a conductor and a star soprano by any stretch of the imagination.
Wouldn't that be a dream?
Well, in a way, yes, and in a way, no, because it means that I came to it quite late. And when I came to the opera, I was a bit like, this is just a snobby, boring, kind of cobwebbed medium. But it's when you dig a little bit deeper that you're like, this stuff was meant to be completely entertaining and accessible, right? This was popular music of the time, you know? The clues to me lie in what was it like when it was first performed? And audiences, it was only Wagner. He was the first to put audiences in the dark.
Yes.
And to make it completely silent and polite. The opera-going experience before that was much wilder. People would talk, you'd have a meal,
Right.
you'd sort of go off into side rooms for conversations.
Very
and that's why sometimes
social.
when you're sitting there and you're going, why is this so long? And why are they saying the same thing over and over and over again? It's
Yeah.
because it was just a very different experience where
Right.
it was the audiences were much more rowdy. And also even, and we know this with the Abduction or the Unfolding from the Seraglio, the original production, that rival composers would pay audience members to heckle, right? And so you can read Mozart going, even though the hecklers were the paid hecklers called the clacks were in the audience, my music was so
Right.
good that I was able to drown them out, basically.
Isn't that fascinating?
And what we've done as well, and again, it all comes from my deep love and obsession for Mozart, right? I'm not really in the business of throwing a hand grenade at anything. But also we know that Mozart, when he was writing this, was worried that the singers would come in with their own material they wanted to sing. And that
Okay.
was quite common, to be like, I want to insert this aria that I know I
Somewhere.
can sing well. So he was like, okay, it's game on now for me to make something amazing. And so it was a much more robust form with things being chopped and changed and moved around and inserted and taken out. And audiences were just much more, rowdy and reckless.
That sounds like such a collaborative experience to be able to have. And I'm correct me if I'm wrong, but Mozart went into writing this with an understanding of who the singers
Yep.
were going to be. So
Yep.
then you're also, if they are going to bring you suggestions, you can be like, well, actually, I've written a song that's going to, you can do,
Yeah,
and you're going to be
completely.
fine.
Completely.
But that's so interesting when you are then putting on this production that was essentially written for someone. So you're not only embodying characters, but you're embodying performers
Yeah,
who
completely.
are 200, 300 years old, and then you're kind of part of this living legacy. So you've got that emotion as
Yep.
well.
Yeah.
And even the legacy of Mozart himself, and I'm really interested to hear that you've got this obsession with Mozart,
of
because
course.
what an interesting character he was.
Yeah.
I think so many people know him as this child prodigy, this musical genius,
Yep.
but there is this very cheeky, funny, wicked side to Mozart that we see in his letters,
Yeah.
in some of his more controversial compositions. That is something that I think with this production as well, that you really have this kind of light and serious side of Mozart that we're putting together. I would love to hear about this kind of juxtaposition of who he was and how
Yeah.
we see that in this production.
Great question. So yes, this is the challenge and the joy of this piece. That is, it's very funny. It's comedic and farcical, and then has these deep psychological undertones. And the way that the opera kind of flips between those two things is like this beautiful roller coaster. And you're laughing along, and then something really dark and fucked up happens, and then you're laughing along, and it's some of the most beautiful and romantic music you've ever heard in your life. And that was in the original DNA of the piece. And I think you're right in that it does express something about Mozart. And this was his genius, that he was able to oscillate between those two forces. So we know, as you said, via his letter writing, like he was one of the dirtiest people ever, right? And Vienna was also incredibly raunchy at the time as well. So that was sort of in the zeitgeist. But then he just had this sublime gift, which was to capture a whirlwind of human experience like no one really before him.
Yeah.
And I think this is the thing about Mozart, to put in a nutshell. He made comedy beautiful.
Wow.
And that is something so special across this piece, and is very, very hard to do. And that reflects his personality, his bawdiness, his love of people at the bottom rungs of society who are like grubby and not so glamorous, but able to elevate them into something divine and heavenly that only the opera can do. So I do feel like Mozart is in the opera in that way.
That is, firstly, beautiful and fascinating, but I think it does give such an insight into the fact that this man who was a genius, there's still this sense of being part of the everyday person's life and wanting to represent them on stage and following an experience that the everyday person can relate to, even if you are this child prodigy. And there's this really gorgeous kind of sense of delight in everything he writes, and especially, I mean, I love his letters and Leck mich im Marsch.
Oh yeah,
I
classic.
think is
Classic. Yeah.
absolutely brilliant. But I love that this playfulness when it comes to this production as well, when you've got this, as you say, we end with this beautiful number that is really reflecting on some philosophical values. And at the same time, it was marketed historically and today as a sex comedy.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
What is so radical historically about a sex comedy and today?
Well, I think it sort of maybe points to the fact that, and you know much more about this than I do, that we sometimes look back at history and think everyone was just very prudish and sanitized. And that's just profoundly not the case. Like, it's quite interesting. Joseph II, who was the emperor, the Holy Roman Emperor, so of Vienna and the Austrian Empire at the time, they approached him, and this is the guy who commissioned Mozart to write these operas. They approached him at one point and said, we should look at maybe licensing prostitution in Vienna and setting up brothels, and his response was, well, then we need to put a roof over the whole city, because the whole city is just a giant it's just a giant brothel. And I think that speaks to kind of the fact that sex comedies were kind of quite common in opera comedy at the time. So it wasn't like a radical kind of shocking event. It was quite enjoyable and cheeky.
Right.
I think what Mozart did so cleverly was to make that beautiful and to make that divine and to elevate that medium and those ideas.
So it really is a bringing together of what was, I think, two popular genres, where you had your very serious opera at the time, and then you did have your very comedic, bawdy opera, and being able to put those two things together, which is so funny to think about. If that was like an innovation he was making at the time, today we still consider that an innovation. I think theatre goers are going to be so surprised coming into this production about what to expect.
Yeah, I think like that. I mean, a big part of the me grappling with how we're going to do it with the conductor Chad Kelly and the design team was like, what's the genre of this thing? And we kind of land on it's a dark rom-com.
Oh, I love that.
And that's sort of something I've never seen before, which should be fun.
A dark rom-com, and it's sung.
And it's sung, exactly. There's something for everyone really under that. I think this is why Mozart's so kind of interesting, is that it's very easy to think of him as this like controversial sort of trailblazer, and he wasn't really. He was just kind of working within strict categories and was able to melt them and mold them to his will, but there's not this sense that he was obsessed with himself. That was an idea that sort of came a bit later with Beethoven, being like the artist's suffering is in the music and blah blah. Mozart was effectively a servant, right? He was under the command of what the people who hired him wanted him to do. And so he was just really good at diving into the genres that were already established.
Yes, right.
And I don't know how useful that is for the interview, but because I'm really getting into like tangents now. But that's the thing, he wasn't really like, I'm a trailblazer, I'm burning it down and starting again.
Yes.
He was just did what he did the best.
And it's very interesting because this production didn't make him a grand amount of money, but it really elevated his status, and it did become such a popular production
massive
at the time.
Yeah, it was like such a hit. Like Marriage of Figaro, Magic Flute, Don Giovanni were nowhere near as successfully received as The Abduction from the Seraglio.
Which is incredible to think about, because you hear about things like the Magic Flute, we connect that to the great productions of history, that this far surpassed that in terms of not only I think it was the initial sales, but people were demanding this to come back.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Wow.
Yeah. But I still think he would be shocked if we were doing it 300 years later. I think that would kind of do his head in.
So you think even Mozart would be shocked if he could suddenly come back in time, that this production is still going on today?
For sure, because they weren't staging operas that were written hundreds of years earlier.
Yeah.
So you'd maybe have a run of a few seasons after that, and other people would take it on, and then it would just die out. It'd be like no one's redoing Lord of the Rings, you know what I mean? Like that movie happens and it's great and it travels the world, and then it just has its time. And that was the opera culture. And this is what I'm very interested in as an opera director, which is like viewing these things in a way that is, you love how good they are, but you're not worshipping them as perfect, never touch it, don't change it. It's so sacrosanct. It's really not, and that's not how they were written.
I think, especially when you said that these are, at the time it was written a very collaborative experience, they were ever changing, even on stage or in the rehearsal room. I would love to know, even when you first went into the rehearsal room with the rest of the cast, what kind of changes surprised you? Was there any shocking moments in the rehearsal room where performers were able to add or change? What was that process like?
Yeah, it's been like a complete joy. And Chad Kelly, who's conducting the opera, is like such a specialist in this medium. And his approach is the singers have to make it their own. And there's so much that's up for interpretation. So we can sculpt some of the stuff around what the singers want to do vocally and emotionally. And I think the challenge with this material is the endless repeats, right? With people saying the same lines over and over and over again. And it's a bit daunting when you look at it going, how am I going to do this? But then you find these singers, and we have like such a phenomenal cast who are up for the challenge. approach of being like, how do I express a theme with as many different colors as possible?
Wow.
And then you go on kind of an emotional journey, you know, and kind of dive into single ideas and seeing how deep you can go really in terms of emotional expression.
Isn't that fascinating how the cultural context which we're performing just changes so much of that source material? I love this idea that at the time they had to repeat things again and again because people were just having a party and a good old
Yeah,
yap
there was a big
in the
element
stand.
of that. Yeah.
Whereas today, then you have to have these performers who are capable of showing this kind of kaleidoscope of emotional journeys to the audience through the repetition.
Yeah.
That is genuinely fascinating.
Oh, good.
I think I would love to kind of wrap up by asking if Mozart could come to this production, if he suddenly appeared in 2025.
And we all just started screaming, seeing like a ghost.
No one believes that it's him.
Yeah.
What do you think, with everything you know about Mozart, what do you think he would think of this reimagining of his production?
Well, I think we know that he was irreverent and cheeky and like quite funny. So I think he would hopefully be interested in the comedic element that we have. But I think as well, I think it would be I imagine it would be quite a bizarrely moving experience to see the work that you've written has the same emotional impact as it did then and it does now. And I think that is sort of his eternal gift.
I've heard it said of people who've been able to see this production that the experience is euphoric.
Yes.
Truly euphoric to be able to watch this, maybe historically and definitely now. And I think it is such a joy and a privilege to be part of this ongoing legacy of music and to be able to reimagine it in this way. And
yeah, it's the best job in the world. I mean, I leave these rehearsals and I feel like I've taken some sort of Valium. Like I just feel so relaxed and calmed and kind of like you're floating on a cloud.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the kind of the power of his music to kind of enlighten you. And I think as well we're living in a time which is so digitally sanitized and you know it's just such a digital universe. To come and experience something analog that you can't do at home is miraculous.
Absolutely, and as you said, it's been able to come into this space, go into this journey where you're in this zone of ambiguity, exploring new ideas about what it means to be human all throughout history, what it means to be human today, to change, to evolve. How incredible. I cannot wait to see this production.
Thanks, cheers, thank you.
Abduction will be playing between the 12th and the 16th of August at the Palais Theatre in St Kilda. Head to victorianopera.com.au to find out more. I think this could have gone for hours. I want to keep talking.